for recording purposes, we've added 2 weeks onto this series, and then the last 2 weeks, at the end of those 2 sessions, the back committee will have discussions to talk about the budget considerations that are being made and that have been shared as part of the budget presentations. So you probably got 1.5 of that, but that's okay. It's been memorialized in the recordings. So we will start promptly at 11:05. Terrence, are you ready?
I think I'm ready, yeah.
Okay, so people are coming in pretty consistently, so we're giving them another 2 minutes. We know that admission process takes a bit. So again, thank you all so very much for coming. And DeAndre, you're going to help monitor the chat?
Will do.
Thank you. You're so good at that. I'm not good at the chat and view thing at the same time. So between the two of us, we will make sure that everyone's comments and questions are acknowledged. And also remember that if you want to save the chat or you want to, the notes from the chat, you'll have to save the file, and Coral will remind us of that as well.
Yeah, for all of those of you who write in the chat and expect me to actually notice, I'm afraid my wife tells me I don't know how to multitask. I can only monotask. So I'm reliant entirely on DeAndre and Shamin that way. So I'll just get the screen share started here so that
awesome, that works.
We can go.
It's always so colorful. I appreciate that, Terrence.
Yeah, well. Yeah, so it's a pretty frog though, isn't it? It's not a Pacific Northwest tree frog, but it's a pretty frog.
Are you sure that's not? Looks awful much like one.
I think it is, Terrence.
Is it? You know, maybe it's the miracles of Google. I mean, I don't remember how I grabbed this image. I do know it's royalty, copyright blessed, but so.
And Jim gave you props in the chat. Terrence is doing a great job with this unenviable task. So absolutely, Terrence, thank you so much for sorting through our budget and budget processes. And again, I want to thank the group for hanging in here with us. You know, when I first brought up the idea of doing these weekly, I know that the tasks seemed to be daunting, but I knew that the college community would respond. We are all interested in the future of North, and so this is part of that. And so we appreciate you all hanging in there with us. So Terrence?
Yeah, well, let me get started. And let me just say, one of the things I really makes a big difference to me at North that I really enjoy is that the support of the community, because I was really embarrassed last week, but you were all extremely supportive and understanding. So why don't we get started and have our land acknowledgement?
Absolutely. Please go with me to the land acknowledgement, and it reads as follows. On behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continue to honor and bring light into their ancient heritage. Without them, we wouldn't have access to this gathering, dialogue, learning, and Zoom space. We ask that you take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So today we're going to do two things. One is we're going to provide a data update. I told you last time the data wasn't quite right, so we're going to make sure it's all correct. And the second is talk about facilities. So the data is about the operating budget. 15% of the operating budget, $8 million, is money we pay to the district for administrative overhead and for international programs and for communications and for IT. So that's 15% of our expenses. 50% by program code is for instruction. So instruction does not include the deans and so on. Instruction is just faculty and direct delivery, as it were. 7% is academic administration, so it's the vice president, the deans, and so on for oversight and everything, and their staff too, by the way. And the libraries, about 2% of the total operating budget. Student services is 8% total operating budget. Institutional support, which includes myself and the president's office, is 7%. And finally, facilities, coded by program as plant operations, is 11% of the operating budget. So that's how things, break out here at North. District expenses, that first slice of the pie, about $8 million, $8,050,000, I think it is. Most of that is in the form of salary and wages. As you may not be aware, our benefits are very generous. So, the benefits are a big chunk of that, even though there's part-timers and everything. Then personal services, which is consultants, is basically nothing. Goods and services are another 18%. Travel, like 1%. And then capital, it's so small it doesn't even show up. So the operating budget by type, which is to say salary and wages, 49%, 18% benefits. Then we got personal services again, contractors about 0 basically. Goods and services 8%. Capital outlays almost nothing. Computers almost nothing, because again, computers are paid for out of the district budget. So that $8 million number, that was actually in district charges. Client services, which are essentially things that are like financial aid and that type of thing, related with how they pay for everything. Debt service, we have some very small debts that we have to service. Operating support, and I've got to confess here, I can't really define that really clearly for you because I haven't looked at the coding carefully enough, but that's 7%. And then the district charges, again, about 15%. So when you look at all that collectively, we talk about fixed costs, variable costs, or flexible costs. Very substantial part of his costs are fixed. Where we have flexibility is in the hourly wages. We have some flexibility around some of our contracts. And of course, we have flexibility around part-time faculty. When you look at our salaries and wages, they break down by different employee category. Executives, and this does not include the district, this is just North. 3% is total salary base. Managerial exempt, which is sort of the director or dean level, it's 10%. Professional exempt staff, which are, you know who you are, it's about 9%. Hourly is only 3%. It's a very small number. Permanent faculty clearly are the biggest big chunk, 26%. Part-time faculty, big chunk, 27% of the salaries and wages. Classified staff is about 20% of the salary and wages. And then we have a tiny slice for student hourly, it's about 1%. Work study is basically nothing because that's paid for mostly out of work study. And then exempt support staff, which are essentially the administrative assistants to the various, to the president and the VPs, about 1%. So that's the breakdown for salary and wages. So when you look at salary and wages, fixed versus variable, most of that is fixed in terms of permanent, full-time positions. The part-time, hourlies and the associate faculty, again, it's only about a third of the budget. So the point of this haul is that when we look at that budget, you think about it, it's not, you can't really say that we have that much flexibility, but the truth is that the true reality is that all of us my position, any number of positions, are sort of optional. They're bad effects if we don't have the positions filled, but there's a lot of flexibility. There's only a few things to truly fix where we have contractual agreements that are almost infinite, in terms of there's a 20-year lease, there's debt service of a decade, that type of thing. But pretty much everything else, we've got some flexibility around. So that was just by way of trying to make sure you had the right numbers. They don't differ that much from what I originally presented, but I just want to make sure that you had it updated correctly. We're going to focus now on facilities, which is at 11% of the budget in terms of programs. That's about $5 million. So the budget looks different. Facilities looks different from a cost point of view than the rest of the college. The rest of the college has a lot more compensation. You're up into the 80% range. But in facilities, compensation is, I can't remember the exact number, but it's you can eyeball it there. It's about 65%. And that is because there are a lot of big ticket items that other departments just don't have. So what are those big ticket items? Here you see that, starts off with mail, which is just a small number, about 25 grand. All telephone services are under facilities. That's about $200,000 a year. Keeping the building heated and everything, surprisingly small number, 70-some thousand dollars. It's natural gas. This, by the way, is the 1920 budget. And that number is starting to go up because, editorial comment here, the natural gas fracking boom has all been a financial engineering scam. And the chickens are coming home to roost on that one. As you can see, I have sort of this little conspiracy theory thoughts in my head. But if you ever want to talk to me about it, there's a real interesting story there financially. Electricity is the biggest single number. It's over $800,000 a year in electricity. Water and sewage is budgeted, has been budgeted for $200,000 a year, $250, I'm sorry. Disposal, that's just waste and everything, garbage, trash, 65, I think, a year. And then other goods and services, which are all the things from toilet paper to broken, window panes that need to be replaced, to equipment that we need to, use to fix things. That's a little over $350,000 a year. Now, we talked about fixed versus variable, and most of these would fall closer into the fixed category. But it's interesting because if you look, for this last year, what did we spend on electricity? We only spent $620-some thousand, or $30-some thousand, $630-some thousand, because COVID-19 just meant we didn't have a lot of lights on. Obviously a lot of things continue to have to run, but there was quite a savings in electricity because of COVID-19. Conversely, some of the challenges we're finding in this whole budget process is that, just to be direct, budgeting wasn't taken that seriously in the past, and so we did a lot of sort of autopilot budgeting without really reviewing the actual costs and so on. So if you look at that water and sewage number, that is about $250,000, right? That's the budget. And that's been the budget for the last at least 4 years. That's as far back as I went. But if you look at the last 4 years, the number that we spent on water and sewage has never been below $400,000 for 2016, 17, 18, 19, 20. So just so happens the COVID sort of canceled out the water and sewage under budgeting. But next year, of course, well, I don't know, next year, of course. The year after next, it won't. So that's sort of an overview of facilities, other expenses. Compensation is still the majority of the cost within facilities. And it breaks out into 4 different buckets. Administration, which by the way includes mail services. custodial services, over $1.2 million, which is the largest single count. There are 18 custodians. Grounds, which is a small crew, but still $250,000. And then maintenance crew, that very highly skilled crew, about $1 million. So that's the breakdown of all those compensation categories. Compensation is just salary and benefits. So, of course, the question comes to mind, is facilities efficient? Well, we may need to root out some waste here. This root, by the way, was just pulled out of a drain last week. Some of you may have noticed some of the drains don't drain very well. Well, this is one of the reasons why. Facilities crew did some tracing and things, and they managed to pull this root out. We didn't have to call any special company or anything. It was plumbing companies. We didn't call anyone like that. They figured it out and pulled it out. And I was rather impressed by the size of this thing. Thought you might enjoy seeing it. So the way we figure out whether we're being efficient or not is not our own judgment, but by what they call benchmarking. And benchmarking is just a technique where you look across an industry, in this case, the maintenance industry, custodial, et cetera, and you see what the norms are. You figure out what other people are doing, how much time it's taking them, how much money it's taking them to do it, and you then compare how you're doing against the standards. The benchmark we were looking at, or have looked at, is the APA benchmark. APA stands for American Physical Plant Association. Okay, and this is a professional association of physical plant managers for colleges and universities. So it's right in our backyard. So the conceptual framework of this benchmark is that it's what they call service level based. And that's just a recognition that every institution has a different expectation or service level, how well things are kept up or maintained. So I'm assuming that the Bill Gates Foundation, for example, has a very high service level. They really want things to shine and to be perfect and nothing to ever break down. And they have the money, frankly, to make sure that happens. They can staff at that level. Whereas, sadly enough, we as a community college, we're towards the other end of the spectrum. So service level basis. The second thing is that it's based on the number of square feet a staff member can cover. In other words, it's based on the gross square feet, or GSF, of a facility to see, how many square feet can a custodian cover, or should a custodian cover to achieve a certain level of service. And also acres per FTE, because that's about grounds. So the benchmark sources, in other words, how did they come up with this benchmark? The first thing to note is that it is all about higher education. It's colleges and universities. We're not picking a benchmark that's for corporate offices or anything like that. The second thing they do is they do what they call work task analysis. So they really go in and break down all the individual actions an employee is expected to take. And I'll be showing you some examples as part of their work and part of their service. And then they do continual surveys to update the information and make sure, it's accurate and everything. So there are benchmarks for 3 different items that we're looking at. The first benchmark is for maintenance. So how many square feet can a maintenance person be assigned, so to speak, and achieve a certain level of service? So we have over 700,000 square feet of gross square feet of space to manage. And so how many, basically you simply take the number of square feet 770 some thousand square feet, and you divide it by the number of staff people we have doing the work. So this does not count, administrative staff. This counts the people who are actually doing the work. In the case of grounds, it's acres per FTE. And there are two types of ways you look at acres per FTE. One is the main campus, so you have this density and intensity of use. And then you may have a campus like we have, where you have areas where you have a wetland and you don't have much density. So those are sort of two different benchmarks. This one we're going to use the main campus one. Then custodial services, just like maintenance, it's how many square feet does each employee have responsibility for taking care of. So all of that, again, just want to emphasize this is by service level. So what is a service level and how does it look like? So these are the service levels for custodians. And so what you'll see on the far left here is the highest level of service is orderly spotlessness. And it provides a high level description here. Floors and base moldings shine and are fresh and bright. Colors are fresh. Everything's been freshly cleaned. There's no accumulation of dirt. So it's just a really, really nice facility to go into. The other extreme of the scale on the far right is level 5, unkempt neglect. Floors and carpets are dirty and have visible wear or pitting. Colors are faded and dingy. There's a conspicuous buildup of dirt and dust, etc. So there's a spectrum here. You can have facilities at either end of the spectrum, or in the middle. In the upper right-hand corner, what you'll see is level 1, a custodian's only responsible for 8,500 square feet. So they can get that shine going. Whereas in level 5, they're responsible for 45,600 square feet. They just can't do it. There's just too much ground to cover to be at the orderly spotlessness level. So this is the way sort of a standard is. Now, this is a very high level view of the standard, but there is more detail. So in this case, this is just looking at classrooms, which are differently rated than offices and that type of thing. What you have here is the APA level 1 is the orderly spotlessness level. So every single day, whiteboards get cleaned, floors get mopped, trash gets replaced, all this stuff. And you can see it's very detailed there. On the far right end of the spectrum, APA level 5, which is the, I've forgotten the term, neglect level, as it were. Trash only gets emptied once a week. Whiteboards only get cleaned once a week. Other things just happen, much later. So there's a lot of detail behind these benchmarks. So let's take a look at one here. This is gross square feet per maintenance staff. So in order to have a showpiece facility, the maintenance staff can't be assigned more than 50,000 square feet for, per maintenance staff member if we're going to keep it at that high level, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation level. On the other hand, on the far right, crisis response, you've got over 200,000 square feet of physical plant that each maintenance staff person is responsible for. And at that point, they can no longer do any preventative maintenance or anything. They're just fixing things as they break, which could be okay, except A, when things are broken, they don't get fixed immediately. And B, when things are broken like this, what ends up happening is the first year you do it like that, you may actually save some money. But 5 years later, or 3 years later even, you're going to be spending a lot more money because you're not doing what they call preventative maintenance work to make sure your equipment is in good shape and everything. So one thing about these service levels that's really important to understand is that these are averages, and there is no such thing as an average facility. The age of the facility, the types of systems that the facility is using, are you using old mechanical systems or highly intelligent new mechanical systems? The intensity of use, is the campus of 775,000 square feet, do we have 3,000 students or do we have 5,000 students? All those things have an effect on where you stand on this scale. You could be a highly intensive use. And so the point is this, that when you look at these numbers, or you look at these ranges, there's a normal distribution. So the average level 3 managed care thing, smack dab in the middle, that's average. But there's a normal distribution, which means that there are some facilities where if you've got, if each one of your maintenance people is responsible for just about 100,000 square feet, they can actually provide potentially comprehensive stewardship level care because of the characteristics of the facility. Conversely, it's also possible they could be in the reactive management mode because of the characteristics of the facility. The point here is that there's a bit of a range here, unless you get down to the nitty-gritty details, which we haven't, and spend about $35,000. You're not really going to know where you are here. But what you do know is you're not going to be, in this case, at the showplace facility level or in the crisis response level. You're going to be somewhere, kind of in the middle there. So where do we want to be with maintenance? We want to be at this level of comprehensive stewardship because we certainly can't afford to be a showpiece facility, but we want to be in a place where not only do things consistently work, but a maintenance level which minimizes our long-term cost. We don't want to save money this year and then end up spending a lot more money 3, 4, 5 years down the road. So where are we? Our maintenance staff they got about 70,000 square feet that each of them is responsible for. So that's, we're right in there, pretty much, I would say. Takes more analysis to figure out exactly where we are, but we're kind of right in there. There may be some opportunity to be more efficient or not. Well, what about acres per ground staff? And we're talking about the main grounds here of the campus, 15 acres. The whole campus is 62 or 63 acres, but we're just talking about looking at the main grounds. And when I say that, we do have to take the others into account. So we probably end up moving the actual thing a little to the right when you take in the rest of the grounds into effect, but just analyze the main grounds. So where do we sit on that score? Well, we're right here. We're between moderate and moderately low. We don't have a target in the case of grounds, but I think you can all see that, there are places where it would be nice to, be a little more up to date with tree trimming and that kind of thing. But that's where we are on grounds. We have some special characteristics which take a little more work. So we have quite a few homeless on the campus. And so our ground staff goes out and periodically makes sure that those areas, that there isn't too much trash buildup. And in particular, there are sometimes, for want of a better word, medical supplies that and medical waste that needs to be cleaned up, and it requires a bit of care. So finally, we have the category of custodial staff. And as you can see, the Bill Gates Foundation, or Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'm sorry, orderly spotlessness, they're under 10,000 square feet of custodian. So every custodian is only responsible for about less than 10,000 square feet of space. The University of Washington, as a point of reference, targets level 2, which is called orderly tidiness, APA level 2. And so that's basically around 16,500 square feet of space that every custodian is responsible for. So in the case of North, again, we're just talking the 18 custodians. Each of them is responsible for 43,000 square feet of space. So unfortunately, custodial services is something that was cut in the recession and has never recovered. And they are, right, I mean, in the unkempt neglect level of staffing. That doesn't mean that our facilities are, you know, are unkempt and neglected. I think the staff does a great job of doing the best they can to operate at a higher level than they're funded. That said, I will say that just as an outside person, yeah, level 4 is about as good as it gets at North. So that is an overview of sort of facilities at North. My takeaway from this is to the question, is facilities efficient? Certainly from the benchmarking, facilities is operating as well as it can with the resources that it's been provided. So next week, we'll talk more about where else the money goes. And then the week after that, we'll kind of wrap it up and hopefully, kind of provide you with a synthesis of how the various pieces fit together. So with that, I will turn it over to you for questions.
Thank you, Terrence. That was a great overview. Of all my years of working in colleges, I don't think I've had the facilities operation broken down in that way. So thank you so much for diving in and figuring all of this out. Are there any questions or comments from the group? I didn't see any new notes in the chat. Odessa says thank you. So as you can see, this is one more area that fiscally we're going to have to address. As Terrence mentioned, we've never recovered in this area from the recession. And it is, of course, of great concern just because we want North to be a place where students want to attend. At the same time, the health and safety of faculty, staff, and students is important. Dr. Borges asks, how flexible are telephone costs?
Well, in the near term, they're not that flexible because long distance no longer constitutes that much, frankly. Used to be a big variable, but it's not anymore. There are technologies which are marginally less expensive. And there are also strategies that we could employ which sort of ask, well, how do we think of telephones, right? So you can do everything through a computer now, right? So there's some flexibility there. It is something that the district would need to do because it's a district management, IT, telephones, all that stuff. So it would take a while to implement changes, but there is some flexibility there.
Jonathan Harrington wants to know what percentage, and it started to roll, bear with me here. What percentage of FTEs are taught by part-time faculty?
Yeah, I saw that question. I don't want to give a incorrect number. That it changes a lot, and the budget changes over the past couple of years have changed that number. So I'm going to research it so that I can give an accurate number and then get that to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Pete. Jim Jewell asks if there are any updates on the capital project funding from the state.
I'm not sure what you're referring to, but I will say that there has been no withdrawal of funding from the state on the capital projects that have been approved. So, for example, the library renovation, that will proceed as planned. We also have not had any reduction in the so-called minor works funding that we've received. I will tell you that a few years ago, I was involved with, there's a different version of BAC called the Business Affairs Commission. And we did an analysis of all the capital funding needs for all the community colleges based on age of plant and all that, and compared that bow wave, so to speak, forward-looking need to what the level of funding the state was providing. And if I recall correctly, the deficit over the course of a decade was going to be, in other words, the underfunding level was going to be about $1 billion. And the idea was to get the legislature to start thinking about that. They did not like what we gave them, so I don't think anything's been done about it.
And I sit on that capital project funding committee now as part of WACTC. And, you know, I had questions. There's some, I think, $730 million worth of projects that have been approved. And I've been told that only about half of those have been funded. So we are beginning the process of prioritizing. I think they stopped for a couple of years of prioritizing project requests, where now we are evaluating or beginning to evaluate those again. So the list is going to continue to grow and grow. Steve Hoffman made a comment. We use a lot of electricity because much of our heat is electric. Also, electric rates have gone up 50% since 2012. Carla Thompson wants to know, is there any information on how the state of facilities impacts enrollment? Great question.
Well, I don't have an actual reference I can give you. I wish I remembered what it was, and this would be appalling to, I think, anybody who's on the line who are faculty members. But apparently when they have surveyed students and so on, in terms of the decision to come to an institution, the most significant factor is how they felt when they went to the physical campus. That was the most important, not anything else. It was just, did they feel like, hey, this is a place I could be at?
Right. And Terrence and I are also, we've had this conversation, and we're also looking into how we can scrape together funds to make sure we can do things like replace the blinds and maybe freshen up paint and carpet and all of that, because we want, I mean, we realize North was built in the 70s, but it doesn't have to look like the blinds were put up in the 70s. We need to try and freshen the campus as much as possible. We want students, when they come back, not if, but when they come back, as well as faculty and staff, we want them to be proud of North and feel good about being in our classrooms, in our offices and facility. So stay tuned for that. That's coming. We're still trying to figure out how to get that done, but we'll get it done. There's no question. Let's see. Lisa Sanford asks, do we expect janitorial costs to increase with COVID cleaning requirements?
I think Odessa should speak to that one because she can give you a lot of detail.
Odessa typed the response, but if you could share the response with the group for those who aren't looking in the chat, Odessa, that'd be great.
Oh, her microphone's out, I guess. So I'll just speak to it a bit. It is taking, if I recall correctly, almost twice as long to clean any given space. And that is just as a sort of general protocol. Clearly, if we ended up in a situation where we knew of a COVID case and we had to do what they call, sort of the contact tracing cleaning, try to identify every single location they went to or may have gone to, that would just send the time required through the roof. So it is it's potentially a really big challenge once we do, or not once we do, we already are, offering some limited instruction on campus for the labs and so on. There is a pool of funding from the federal government that is supposed to help us, adjust to and support these kinds of COVID-related expenses. It is limited though, and there are other, faculty are converting their classes to be online, and that funding pool has to support both those needs, as well as the additional PPE equipment and everything that we need. So we're actually in the process, an executive team, of trying to understand whether or not there's enough money there and what it will support or not support in terms of COVID response. Okay, so Odessa says that so far we've purchased $45,000 just to stockpile various supplies related to COVID response.
Jewel pointed out, Odessa, you and your crew are doing amazing work, to say the least, under difficult circumstances, and I think we can all agree. Thank you all so much for what you do. There is also a comment from John Lederer. The frequency of cleaning, especially bathrooms, has also increased. And Benjamin Howlett points out that refreshing interiors of classrooms would be fairly inexpensive. Paint, new carpet, vinyl baseboard. The major costs come from FF&E, desks, chairs, and furniture. Absolutely, I agree. Yeah,
and I must say I got a sobering tour from Ben and Odessa through various classrooms, and there are a lot of mix and match chairs, and a lot of the chairs, the covering was sort of peeled off and so on. So I can see how that will affect students who have choices.
Mm-hmm.
Whether they feel like, hey, this is a good place to be.
And Mari Nash points out that she really enjoyed meeting and working with all of the custodial crew, and that they're very vital to our campus. And I think we all agree there as well. Thank you, Mari, excuse me. Any other questions or comments?
If I can step in and just maybe give just a few words about where the BAC committee is right now, since we have a few more time, a few moments. Just wanted to give the campus an update that we do have our BAC committee who's been meeting and going over, and really thank them in the group who represents every area in our unions, and then also staff and classified and things of that nature, to really go through all of these budget presentations that each of the budget managers as well as the vice presidents have been really presenting over. And our goal as the committee, and sharing that role with Sharush, is to really help and make sure that we provide recommendations to all of these presentations about different areas that we're looking at, whether that is on a reserve request or cuts, whether that's in the 25 or 15% areas. So we will then, as the president stated, we will have our recommendations presented to this group for you all on the 25th. In our next all-campus meeting here, but just wanted to recognize that there's a recommendation body that has been really going through each and every one of the presentations that represents each of you all's areas, and we want to share what we have come up with so we can make sure to be transparent and hear back from you all on our recommendations. So just wanted to take time to thank the committee and thank you all for allowing us to do that.
There is a comment thank you, DeAndre. There is a comment from Jill Lane. I would also like to add that we have areas not up to code with the Americans with Disabilities Act. For example, many of the automatic doors did not work last year. I'd love this considered as well.
Yes, there's no shortage of work to be done.
And Benjamin Howlett says we're currently working on a PWR project to address ADA issues.
So for those of you who are unfamiliar with what PWR stands for, it stands for Project Work Request. And it's a funding request that we put into the state. And when there are compliance issues, sometimes we can receive funding from them for that specialized purpose. Because ultimately we're self-insured and the state's liable, so they like to get those off the plate.
Dr. Crawford, there's a question above Jill's from SK. Any words about the Wellness Center? I think I haven't heard the update regarding the budget cuts in Wellness Center, or I missed it.
Lorraine Odom made a presentation to BAC yesterday. It's pretty long. I don't know if we have the time to get into that, but SK, we could fill you in on that separately if you'd like.
Also remember, as DeAndre mentioned, that the actual proposals and considerations will be shared at our last meeting or two in this series. So are you talking more about the facilities aspect of the Wellness Center?
Sorry, Dr. Crawford, was that to me about the facilities aspect?
Yeah, SK. And I was waiting for them to type a response in the chat. So while that's happening, in the meantime, Dr. Borges asked if, as we start finalizing these budget presentations in the next few weeks, what actions or steps are you foreseeing for the college community to undertake to take part in the budget work that will be necessary? You know, this has, this is a process. So what the BAC committee is doing is they're going to make recommendations to the proposals and considerations that have been made. I asked the College Council to be prepared to meet in order to look over the proposals and recommendations and to make their own. And ultimately, we'll have to make decisions based on informed decisions based on these discussions and recommendations as to how we will move forward. One of the things that has been recognized thus far is that there are some areas that simply cannot manage the necessary cuts. So we have to figure out how to balance these measures and how to phase these cuts, if you will, or activities out over time. And so those are the conversations that we will be having. But right now, everything is under consideration. There are proposals being made and so on. And as I mentioned previously, North will look different after all of this, not just because of COVID, but because of us trying to right-size our budget and basically clean up what has happened over the past few years. As far as revenue declines and enrollment declines, and us just not really paying attention to the budget the way we should. So there's more to come. We're not at the end of the entire process. This process is in waves, and this is really just the first wave. So I encourage you to check into the last two sessions of this series when the BAC committee is actually talking about what they've heard, what's been proposed, and the considerations and their recommendations as well. Are there any more questions for Terrence or for Odessa? Oh, okay, SK did respond. Since we heard about the temporary layoffs of all the childcare staff, but nothing specifically about the wellness center. As my understanding, they're both very similar regarding making and getting their budgets.
Correct. This is Mary, and we have not hired. So basically how we're taking care of the budget right now to right size is by not filling the director position and the PS2 position currently. We do have an interim, Lorraine Odom, who is at 80% and is the only person employed for the Wellness Center as we move forward right now.
Thank you, Mary. Okay, Terrence, any closing words?
Actually, no. I think we've exhausted you folks with all the various presentations. You're like, oh God, more stuff.
I know.
But appreciate your engagement because you know it is important for us to hear these questions and start thinking about the issues that get brought up and so on, because collectively everything gets informed by all of your thinking and questions and so on. So thank you for that.
And if you can see the group chat, the back committee members have been listed in the group chat. And Julius Rodriguez has said that today's information was incredibly valuable. So again, Terrence, thank you once again for diving in and putting all of this work together. Thank you all for being a part of the Solutions for North. And we wish you all a wonderful day. Please save the chat if you would like to have it.